Hey, my name is Gabe Lawson. I'm 36 years old, and I move pianos for a living in Harper's Bend, Ohio, a river town where the houses are old, the staircases are older, and somebody's grandmother's upright is always on the wrong floor. Lawson Specialty Moving, that's me and my cousin Deck in a box truck with more padding in it than a courtroom. We'll move anything, but pianos are the calling card. If it has strings and weighs more than a cow, you call us. People think piano moving is about strength. It's about listening. Every piano tells you how it wants to be carried, where it's fragile, where it can take weight, and every house tells you how it wants to be entered. You learn to read a doorway like a sentence. You learn that the heaviest thing in any move is never on the inventory. I've carried pianos out of estates where the family stood crying in the yard, and into nurseries where a pregnant woman conducted us by pointing, and down the stairs of a divorce while two lawyers watched to make sure neither side touched it. A piano is never just furniture. It's the family's black box recorder. You want to know what a house was? Find out what happened to the piano. I learned that the hard way, which is the only way I learn anything. Here's my black box. I married at 24, a girl I'd loved since trade school, and for 6 years I thought we were what we looked like. I built the moving company with my best friend Royce, 50-50, his charm and my back, and I work the way young men work when they think effort is the same as attention. 12 hours, 14 building a future for a present I never looked at. And in year 6, my wife and my business partner sat me down at my own kitchen table on chairs I had carried in myself and explained, kindly, with the patience of people who have rehearsed, that they were in love and had been for some time, and that everyone could be adults about it. The divorce took the house. The business split took Royce's clients and half the equipment. But what it really took, the thing I noticed missing years after the furniture stopped mattering, was simpler. I used to trust my read. Doorways, pianos, people. I could walk into a room and feel where the weight was. And it turned out the two people closest to me had been moving a whole secret through my house for 2 years, and I never read a thing. So I rebuilt the company, hired Deck, learned to cook for one, and quietly retired from believing my own eyes about anybody. I read houses now, I told myself. Houses don't rehearse. 8 years like that. A good business, a quiet life, a man careful as a stair landing. Then last August, a Tuesday, the schedule said, Doyle, C1BR APTTO rental house Maple ST, small load. Small load was right. Clara Doyle's whole life fit in our truck with room for an echo. She was 33, renting the little blue house on Maple with the crooked porch, and she met us at the curb in a school teacher cardigan, despite the heat, with a clipboard of her own, which I respected, and a way of standing slightly apart from her own belongings, like a woman supervising the burial of evidence. Brown hair with a copper shine where the sun got it, pulled back tight. Green eyes that cataloged everything and volunteered nothing. Polite as a hotel. Boxes labeled in handwriting so disciplined it looked typeset. Kitchen. Linens. Classroom. And one box, taped more than the others, that she carried to the truck herself and placed on the front seat like a passenger. Music. Do not stack. I notice hands. In my trade you watch hands all day, telling you where people want a thing before their mouths do. Clara Doyle had pianist hands, and I don't mean delicate, I mean trained. The reach, the way her fingers spread flat on a box top to test the tape, the unconscious span of a tenth. And there was no piano on my inventory. A music teacher, it turned out, the new one at Harper's Bend Elementary, with a box of music she wouldn't let me stack, and a metronome that surfaced from the bubble wrap when a carton shifted, an old brass and walnut one, beautiful, the pendulum kind. She took it from my hands fast, too fast for politeness, then caught herself, embarrassed. Family thing, she said. It's older than me. Mahogany bass, German movement, I said. It belongs on a piano. It was like watching a window get painted shut in real time. I don't play anymore, said Clara Doyle, in a tone that ended the conversation so completely that Dex started whistling just to repaint the silence, and we finished the move in professional quiet, and that would have been that. Except for two things. First, the rain. We were half unloaded at Maple Street when an Ohio sky did its August trick, sun to slate in 9 minutes, and the first fat drops came down right as Deck, and I had her sofa on the ramp. Clara came off the porch to help, and I told her what I tell everybody, that the quote includes weather, get inside, and she ignored it, also like everybody, and grabbed a box, and the bottom, gone soft in the humidity, let go. It was the classroom box. Construction paper, flashcards, a xylophone, 40 recorder songbooks, All of it on the wet lawn, and she dropped to her knees in the rain gathering it with a panic completely out of proportion to record her songbooks, and I knelt down across from her to help and saw why. Mixed in with the classroom things, where she must have tucked them at the last minute, were photographs. Loose ones. A girl at a piano, age 6 maybe, 10, 14, recital dresses, getting longer. The same upright piano, in every frame, dark walnut, carved music desk, and behind the girl in every photo, an old man with his hand on her shoulder like a benediction. She gathered those photos out of the rain the way you'd gather a fallen bird. I handed her the two that had slid toward me, face down, without turning them over, because a man who moves houses for a living learns what's his to look at. She took them, looked at me, recalculated something. "Thank you," she said, meaning the face down part. Second thing, the payment. When we finished, soaked through, she met me on the porch with her checkbook and her clipboard and the squared shoulders of a woman bracing for a number. And I knew that bracing, I'd seen it on 100 porches since 2008, and I said the flat quote, "No weather, no stair surcharge, no extra hour," and she said, "That's not what your website calculator said," because of course she'd run the calculator, and I said the calculator's never moved a sofa in the rain. Flat quote means flat quote, and Clara Doyle looked at me for a long second with those cataloging green eyes, and for the first time all day something in the catalog moved. "The school can't afford movers," she said, abruptly, like the words got out before the guard could stop them. "For the winter concert. The risers and the kettle drums are in a storage unit on Route 9, and the custodian has a bad back, and I've been told the budget is, quote, what budget?" She lifted her chin, hating every syllable of asking. "I don't suppose you do charity?" "No," I said. "I do trades. You're looking at the proud new music patron of Harper's Bend Elementary, and in exchange, when my niece hits your classroom next fall, you don't give up on her. She's been kicked out of 2 church choirs. We think it's a gift." And there it was, the first one, sudden as the rain. Clara Doyle laughed. It cracked her whole careful face open. 10 years fell off her, and she put it away again almost instantly, like something that had escaped, but I'd seen it, and I drove home that evening with Deck talking the whole way, and me hearing none of it, thinking with a feeling I hadn't had since before my own kitchen table, oh. So I became the school's mover, and the fall became a series of completely legitimate professional appearances. Risers in October. Kettle drums in November. A donated upright for the gymnasium stage in December. A tired old Wurlitzer I tuned up in my shop first because no kid should meet music out of tune, and when Clara saw it on the stage, leveled and gleaming, she ran her hand along the fallboard with an expression I recognized from Estate Moves, the one people get near a thing they've lost, and she didn't play it. Not a note. The winter concert came, second graders murdering, jingle bells on recorders, parents filming, and Miss Doyle conducting with her whole heart. And I stood in the back by my risers and watched a woman who plainly, visibly, down to the bone, was made of music, spend the entire night making sure everyone got to have some except herself. The metronome sat on her classroom desk. I saw it when I picked up the risers. Polished, centered, silent. A man who reads rooms for a living can retire from believing his eyes all he wants. The eyes keep filing reports. The whole story came out in January, the way ice comes off a roof, silently for weeks and then all at once. The school's furnace died on a Friday, classes let out early, and I was there loading the gym piano for a tuning when Clara came to watch. Coat on, no kids, nowhere to be, and somehow we ended up drinking burnt teacher's lounge coffee on the edge of the stage while the custodian cursed the boiler somewhere below us like a sea captain. And maybe it was the empty building, or the dead acoustics of a gym with nobody in it, or just that January is the month people's fences fall over. But when I asked, carefully, the way you test a stare, "Who's the man in the photographs?" at the piano, she didn't paint the window shut. "My grandfather," she said. Ahmet Doyle. He tuned pianos for 50 years, every piano in 3 counties, and he raised me most of the way my parents were, a small editing pause. Busy people. The piano in the pictures was his. A 1948 Baldwin upright, walnut. He bought it the year he came home from the war, and he taught me on it from age 5. He'd mark my music in carpenter's pencil, big soft arrows. He had no patience for tiny notation, and when I finally played something right, he'd never say good, he'd say, "There. Now it's yours." He left me the Baldwin when he died. It was the only thing I wanted, and the only thing I got, and the only thing I needed. She turned the coffee cup a quarter turn. I kept still, the way you do when a piano is telling you where it's fragile. "I was good, Mr. Lawson. I don't say that about anything else, so believe me about this. Conservatory scholarship, recitals, the path. And then I met Vance my senior year, and Vance was, the editing pause again, longer, certain about everything. Certain we should marry now, certain Indianapolis was better for his career than auditions were for mine, certain that teaching was more practical, certain eventually about which of my friends were good influences, which is to say none. It happens by inches. You know. Nobody storms in and takes your life. They just disapprove of it one room at a time until you're living in the hallway. She said it flat, a lesson recited long after the class. The piano went with me through all of it. He hated it. He'd never have said hated. He said things like, when are you going to be present in this marriage? But it was the one room he couldn't get into. The hour a day I was 17 again with my grandfather's arrows under my hands. Looking back, it was the load-bearing hour. It's why I lasted 9 years. And it's also probably why he did it. The custodian's wrench rang on a pipe somewhere below. Twice, like a bell. I filed in March, 2 years ago. Stayed at my mother's during the worst of it. And in April, while my name was still on that house, Vance sold my grandfather's piano. Called a used instrument dealer, took $400, $400, for a Baldwin Emmett Doyle kept in concert tune for 60 years, and had it hauled out of the living room while I was signing papers across town. He told my lawyer it was marital property in storage, and told me, on the phone, in the only honest sentence of our marriage, maybe now you'll be where you actually are. Her voice stayed level. Her hands on the coffee cup were not. I tracked it for a year. The dealer who bought it flipped in a week. No records he'd share. Sold to a reseller, ma'am. They go where they go. Do you know what a used upright is worth to the world, Mr. Lawson? Nothing. They can't give them away. Craigslist is a graveyard of them. Free, U-Haul. Somewhere out there is the black box of my whole life with a free sign on it, and after a year of calling dealers in 4 states I had to stop, because you can be a person who's looking for something, or you can be a person who has a life, and I'd already spent 9 years being the first thing. She stood up then, briskly, embarrassed at the spill of it, and gathered the cups and said in her hotel voice, anyway, the metronome survived, it was at my mother's. You asked about the photographs, and walked the cups to the lounge, conversation closed, window painted. But here's the thing she didn't know about the man on the other end of that conversation. She'd spent a year calling dealers. Dealers are the front door. I'm a piano mover. We're the basement. Every used upright that changes hands in the Midwest gets carried by somebody like me, and somebody like me remembers, because pianos are how we tell our war stories. A 1948 walnut Baldwin with carpenter's pencil arrows still in the bench music, and a carved music desk doesn't vanish. It just moves outside the paperwork. I started that night, quietly, which I told myself was to spare her hope and was also partly an 8-year-old habit of not letting anyone watch me believe in something. I called Toby in Columbus, who moves for 3 dealers. I called the Mennonite restorers out by Berlin, who buy walnut uprights for the casework. I called Big Ray in Dayton, who has moved more pianos than God, and I described the Baldwin like a missing person, serial range, carved desk, the pencil marks, and Ray said the sentence the whole next year of my life hung off of. Walnut Baldwin, arrows in the bench music that went through the Tipton auction in Indiana fall before last. I didn't haul it, but Crane did. Call Crane. Took 11 weeks, February, March, the trail going cold and warm like a furnace with air in the lines. Crane hauled it from the auction to a flipper in Muncie. The flipper couldn't sell it. Surprise. And wholesaled it with 4 others to a church camp outside Rockport, Indiana, down on the river, 300 miles from Harper's Bend almost to the digit. I called the camp in April. A tired-sounding director confirmed they had a few old uprights in the dining hall. Kids banging on them every summer, one walnut one with, he checked, some kind of pencil scribbles all on the bench. We keep meaning to clean that out. Don't clean it out, I said, in a voice that made him stop chewing whatever he was chewing. I'll be there Saturday. I told Deck I needed the truck for personal business. I told nobody else anything. And on the last Saturday of April I drove 300 miles before the sun was all the way up, down through the flat green start of an Indiana spring, with moving blankets, a piano board, ratchet straps, and the envelope of cash I'd been not spending on a newer truck for 3 years, because some purchases tell you what they're for when it's time. The camp director met me at the dining hall, a big log room smelling of syrup and bug spray, and there it was against the far wall between a vending machine and a bulletin board about water safety. 60 years of concert care and 2 years of exile. Cup rings on the lid. A sticker of a cartoon frog on the fallboard. Somebody had lost a fight with a juice box on the treble end. And inside the bench, when I lifted it with two fingers like a casket lid, sheet music. Czerny, Chopin, a hymnal, and on every page, big and soft and patient, an old man's carpenter's pencil arrows. There. Now it's yours. I'm not going to tell you what I did standing in that dining hall, because Deck has never let me live down the parts he's guessed. The director wanted $300. I gave him the envelope, told him to buy the camp something better than a vending machine, and he helped me board it and wrap it and walk it up the ramp into the truck, where I strapped my passenger in with more padding than I have ever put around any instrument in 19 years. And then I drove 300 miles home through the dark with a 1948 Baldwin riding behind me like a rescued whale. And I'll tell you the truth, I talked to it some. Mostly I told it where we were going. What I had not figured out in 11 weeks of being a genius was the part that mattered, how you give it back. I did it wrong. I want that on the record, because everything after depends on you knowing I did it wrong and knowing why. I did it the way men like me do things, as logistics. I called her on a Sunday, said I had a delivery, school business, needed her at home at 2. Deck and I had the Baldwin cleaned by then, the frog sticker gone, the juice box defeated, the cup rings buffed to ghosts, and my tuner friend Walt had spent 4 hours getting Emmett Doyle's 60 years of True back into the strings. It was beautiful. I was proud the way you're proud, right before life educates you. She opened her door, saw the truck, saw the piano board, saw the shape under the quilted blankets, and I watched the math land on her, watched it the way you watch a glass leave a counter and can't cross the room in time, and her face did not do joy. Her face went white. She came down the porch steps slow, lifted one corner of the blanket, saw walnut and carved music desk, and put the blanket back down like she was covering something in an accident. "What did you do?" she said. Whisper. "Gabe, what did you do?" I told her. Big Ray, Crane, Muncie, the camp, 300 miles, Walt's tuning, the whole proud invoice of it, and every line item made it worse, and I didn't understand and kept going, which is what we do, and somewhere in there she sat down on her own porch steps with her hand over her mouth, and when I finally ran out of competence she said, into the quiet, "You have to take it back. Clara, you don't understand. I buried it. Do you understand what it cost me to bury it? A year of calling strangers? A year of waking up at 3 a.m. with one more dealer to try? And the only way I got my life back was to decide it was gone. The way you decide somebody's dead when there's no body. You just choose a day and grieve. And I did that. I did the work. I built a person who can stand in front of children and conduct hot cross buns without coming apart. And you, her voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was drowning. You drove 300 miles and dug it up. And now it's in my yard. And every arrow he ever drew is sitting on that bench. And I haven't played in 4 years, Gabe. What if? And there it was. The actual fear. Surfacing like a stone in a drained pond. What if I sit down at my grandfather's piano and there's nothing left? He said, no, it's yours. What if it isn't anymore? What if Vance was right and that girl is just gone and now I have to find that out in my own living room every single day? We stood in her yard, the rescued whale between us, and 8 years of careful collapsed in me all at once, because I finally saw what I'd done. I hadn't moved a piano. I'd moved a grave. I'd been so busy being the man who could find it that I never asked the only question my whole trade is built on. The question I ask literally every customer. Where do you want this? And do you want it at all? I'd read the house and skipped the person. Royce and my ex-wife never trusted me with the weight of them either. And I'd spent 8 years calling that their crime, and here I was doing the same thing in a kinder costume. You're right, I said. I didn't ask. I found something lost, and I never asked if it was lost or if it was laid to rest. And those are different jobs, and I know they're different jobs. It's my whole work, and I am sorry. I picked up the dolly straps. It goes wherever you say. Back to Indiana. To the school. To my warehouse, where it can sit safe and you never have to look at it. No rent, no deadline, no expectations. You're the customer, Clara. The customer decides where the weight goes. She looked at me for a long moment, green eyes drowning bright, and then at the blanketed shape, and she said, very quietly, the warehouse, please. And we loaded her grandfather's piano back onto my truck while she stood on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself. And I drove it to my warehouse and set it in the corner under good blankets. And that, I figured kneeling in the wreckage of my grand gesture was the end of whatever had been beginning. It wasn't. What happened instead was stranger and slower and better, and it started with the part of my speech I'd meant least strategically: no deadline. She came to the warehouse the first time 2 weeks later, a Sunday, to see where it was, she said, and stood across the room from it for 10 minutes and left. She came back the next Sunday and lifted the blanket off the music desk. Just that. Looked at the carving for a while, put the blanket back. I gave her a key and made a point of being elsewhere. Some Sundays she'd text after, one line, mission reports from a war I was not entitled to watch. Sat on the bench today. Or, opened the lid. Didn't touch. Or once, in June, just. The arrows. And one Sunday evening in July, I came back to the warehouse to load Monday's job, not expecting her, and the side door was open, and I stopped in the dark of the loading bay. Because there was sound coming across the concrete. A scale. Slow, broken, hands were learning a hallway in the dark. Then a wrong chord, and a silence with a laugh hidden in it. And then, hesitant, simple, wobbling like a foal, the first 8 bars of something old, a hymn, and it steadied as it went, her grandfather's arrows holding it up, 60 years of true rising off, waltz tuning into the rafters of a moving warehouse. And I stood among the dollies and the pads in the dark with my hand over my mouth and listened to Clara Doyle come back from the dead. I never let her know I'd heard, but the Sunday texts changed after that. 20 minutes today, then an hour. Then, in August, he was still in there. I was still in there. Vance found out in September because exes always find out the world is full of helpful people. He called her first, the old certain voice, suddenly nostalgic, suddenly owed. The piano had been marital property, its resale was handled legally, and if it had resurfaced, well, they should talk about what's fair. When she hung up on him, he drove the 3 hours from Indianapolis, and he made the mistake of his life, which was doing it on a Sunday. He found the warehouse because he followed her from the school. He walked in through the side door in a quarter zip and a real estate smile into the middle of her practice hour, and I came around the truck from the loading bay at the sound of the music stopping wrong mid-phrase like a hand clapped over a mouth. I want to be careful here, because this is her part of the story, not mine. I didn't throw him out. I didn't get to be that man, and I'm glad of it now, mostly. I stood at the end of the aisle, present as a forklift, and what happened was this. Vance opened with the voice, the reasonable one, "Clara, be realistic. That instrument was disposed of legally. If it's been recovered, we have things to discuss." And Clara Doyle stood up from her grandfather's bench, closed the fallboard gently behind her like tucking in a child, and was not the woman from the porch steps in April. "You sold it for $400, she said. "I have the dealer's receipt, Vance. I got it during the year you don't know about, the year I spent looking. $400, out of spite, while I signed papers, and you told me maybe now you'll be where you actually are." She walked toward him as she said it, unhurried. A teacher crossing to a noisy desk. "Well, here's where I actually am. I'm in a warehouse in a river town playing again, badly, gloriously, 4 Sundays a month. And the man behind you drove 300 miles and paid more than you sold it for to a children's camp. And then, when I told him I wasn't ready, he parked 60 years of my family in his warehouse with no deadline and handed me a key. That's the going rate for me, Vance. A key and no deadline. You never once made an offer in that currency, and you are 9 years and 1 piano too late to start." She stopped, close enough that he stepped back, which told the whole biography. It was never marital property. It was a marriage witness. And it's mine. He said so. There. Now it's yours. 2 men in my life have said that to me about this piano, and you have never been either of them. Get out of my practice. Vance looked at her, then passed her at me, doing the math men like him do, and found the room unprofitable and left. The side door clicked. The warehouse held its breath. And Clara turned around, shaking now that it was over, the way the brave do, and looked at me down the long aisle and said, "You heard me play. In July. I know you did. Deck told me. Deck tells everybody everything." She came down the aisle. "You never said a word. 3 months. Why?" "Because the customer decides where the weight goes," I said. And because, and 8 years of Careful had one last gasp in it, and I let it die. Because the first night I heard it, I understood I'd been wrong in April about what I drove to Indiana for. I told myself it was the piano. It was never the piano, Clara. It was the sound. I wanted to live somewhere that had that sound in it. And I'd have driven a lot farther than 300 miles, and I've been standing very quietly out of the way ever since, hoping the sound might someday come with the house. Clara Doyle looked at me for a long moment in the warehouse light. Then she took my hand, walked me back down the aisle, sat me on the end of her grandfather's bench, sat beside me, opened the fallboard, and said, "Sit still. This is the one with the most arrows." And she played it for me, the hymn, steadier now, her shoulder against mine through every bar. And when it ended, she left her hands on the keys and her head found my shoulder. And I sat exactly perfectly, gratefully still. "There," she said softly, to the piano, to the warehouse, to me. "Now it's yours." We were married the following June in the school gymnasium of all places, her choice, good acoustics and the rents free, with the second grade's recorder ensemble offering a processional that frightened several relatives, and then Clara, in a short white dress, sitting down at her grandfather's Baldwin, hauled to the gym by Lawson Specialty Moving at a flat rate of one kiss, and playing the hymn with the arrows while I stood there and Deck wept into the risers. Her mother told me afterward it was Emmett's favorite, which Clara had never mentioned, and which I had somehow known anyway, the way you know where the weight is. The Baldwin lives in our front room now, the little blue house on Maple, tuned twice a year by Walt, played every day. Clara teaches at the school still, and Tuesday evening she teaches at home. 6 kids, a waiting list, carpenter's pencil arrows on every page because that's how Doyle's mark music. There's no patience for tiny notation in this family. The metronome sits on the piano where it belonged all along, ticking through the lessons like a long-delayed heartbeat. And some evenings I come in from a job and stand in the hallway with my keys in my hand, not announcing myself, because the sound is coming down the hall, and a man should know better than to interrupt a resurrection. People ask about the drive. The famous 300 miles. It's a town story now. Deck tells it at every cookout, and in his version there's a storm and possibly bandits. They ask if it's true I spent my truck fund, and it is, and the truck I drive is old, and I do not care. They ask what made me do it, a man famous for careful, 8 years of reading houses instead of people. And I tell them what 19 years of pianos taught me, the thing I had to drive to Indiana and get it wrong and stand in a dark loading bay to finally understand. Weight is just physics. I can move anything, that's the easy half of the job. But heavy is different. Heavy is a walnut upright with 60 years of one family in the strings, sitting in a camp dining hall with a frog sticker on it, waiting. Heavy is a metronome on a desk, polished and silent. Heavy is a woman conducting Jingle Bells with her whole heart so nobody notices she's gone quiet inside. You can't lift heavy alone, nobody can. The best you can do is what my trade has always known, bring the padding, take the corner slow, and let the one who owns it tell you where it goes. Her ex sold her piano behind her back for $400. I drove 300 miles to buy it back, and it cost me a truck fund, an apology, and 8 years of being careful. Cheapest move I ever made.